There comes a moment when your silence becomes louder than every argument you never had. A moment when your absence pierces deeper than your presence ever did. A moment when the person who hurt you finally feels the weight of what they lost. There is a turning point in every self-aware person's life where they finally understand that endless explanation does not create understanding. It only drains the soul. You come to realize that people who genuinely value you don't need a thesis to respect your boundaries, and people who don't value you will twist even your clearest explanations into something convenient for them. That moment of clarity becomes the quiet revolution inside you. When you stop explaining yourself, it is not an act of defiance, it is an act of self-respect. For years, perhaps, you believed that if you could express your feelings clearly enough, if you could articulate your intentions with perfect precision, or if you could break down your pain into digestible pieces, others would meet you in that space and understand. But what you learn is far more sobering. Comprehension has nothing to do with clarity when someone is committed to misunderstanding you. So you begin withdrawing the energy you once spent trying to convince people of your worth, your goodness, your loyalty, or your intentions. You begin recognizing that explanation is often a subtle plea for validation disguised as reason. You learn that your desire to be understood came from a place inside you that had not yet realized its own power. You wanted others to see you so you could see yourself more clearly. But once you know who you are, once you trust your intuition, once you understand your heart, you no longer seek permission to exist. This shift is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not a sudden eruption of confidence. It grows slowly, almost invisibly, through moments where you choose your peace over your need to be right. You choose your truth over the urge to justify it. You choose your boundaries over the desire to be liked. That is where personal power begins. When someone questions your choices, you no longer scramble to justify them. You simply state them. When someone doubts your motives, you no longer dissect your intentions for their comfort. You let their doubt be their burden. When someone projects their insecurities or narratives onto you, you don't pick up the storyline they created. You let it fall flat at their feet. This is the silent dignity that appears when you stop explaining yourself. You reclaim your energy from the hands of those who did nothing to earn it. People often confuse silence with weakness, but silence after self-awareness is one of the strongest expressions of inner authority. It communicates that you no longer need their agreement to feel grounded. It shows that you are not dependent on being perceived correctly in order to live authentically. You accept that not everyone will understand you, and that those who choose not to understand you reveal more about themselves than they do about you. And something else happens, something subtle but powerful. Your silence becomes unsettling to those who once manipulated your explanations. They can no longer twist your words because you no longer offer them. They cannot distort your intentions because you no longer present them for interpretation. They cannot use your empathy as leverage because you no longer try to convince them that your heart is pure. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop negotiating your value, you stop shrinking to fit into someone else's limited understanding. You stop lowering your frequency to match the emotional immaturity of someone who refuses to grow. You stop offering your truth to people who treat it casually. and the space you once filled with explanations becomes space for clarity, self-trust, and emotional independence. You begin communicating differently, with fewer words, greater conviction, and deeper calm. You speak from a place of alignment, not insecurity. You speak to be heard, not to persuade. You speak because your voice has meaning, not because your worth is on trial. This is the quiet shift that changes everything. There is a profound difference between reacting and withdrawing. Reacting is loud, emotional, and tethered to the hope that the other person will finally understand how deeply they affected you. Withdrawing, however, is quiet. It carries no demand, no plea, no desire for recognition. It is a choice made from a place of clarity, not chaos. And when you withdraw your energy calmly, something shifts not only in you but in the entire dynamic that once held you captive. Withdrawal is not abandonment. It is not cruelty. It is not a silent punishment. It is the natural consequence of realizing you cannot sustain a connection that feeds on your emotional labor while giving back so little in return. It is understanding that your presence has been taken for granted, your effort overlooked, your warmth undervalued. Instead of making a scene or forcing someone to acknowledge their behavior, you simply pull back what was once freely given. Your calm withdrawal comes from a deep inner knowing people only appreciate energy when they are deprived of it. When you stop offering endless reassurance, they begin to feel the void. When you stop overextending to keep the connection alive, the imbalance becomes undeniable. When you no longer rescue conversations, emotions, or relationships, the weight returns to the one who dropped it in the first place. This act of quiet distance is powerful because it is not fueled by anger, but by awakening. You begin to notice how much emotional effort you were investing, how much space you were holding, how much responsibility you were carrying. You start to see the subtle ways your energy was sustaining dynamics that were never meant to be one-sided. Instead of asking for reciprocity, you reclaim your energy and let the chips fall where they may. And as your energy recedes, your emotional landscape becomes clearer. You notice how peaceful your inner world becomes without constant emotional output. You experience how freeing it is to no longer feel obligated to solve conflicts you didn't create. You learn how natural it feels to pull back when your soul is tired of pouring into places where appreciation has dried up. Calm withdrawal also teaches you about your own power, not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that centers you. You begin to understand that your energy is not a trivial offering. It is a resource, something that nurtures, heals, and brings stability. Not everyone deserves access to that. Not everyone has the capacity to honor it. And the moment you realize this, your energy stops flowing toward people who have not shown they can receive it with integrity. There is a quiet rebellion in conserving your energy. You no longer rush to respond to messages that carry no intention. You no longer invest in conversations that drain rather than nourish. You no longer force emotional intimacy with people who treat connection as a convenience. Your boundaries grow thicker without hostility. Your heart becomes more discerning without becoming closed. Your spirit becomes lighter without apology. People notice this shift even when you say nothing. They feel the absence of your attention. They feel the cooling of your warmth. They feel the distance between what they used to receive and what now remains. And without you uttering a single word, the message becomes clear You are no longer willing to carry the emotional weight for both sides. Calm withdrawal also invites others to rise. If they care, they will step forward. If they value you, they will match your effort. If they were simply benefiting from the imbalance, they will slip away. Your silence becomes the filter that clarity could never achieve through explanation. You withdraw because you finally understand that energy is sacred, and you can no longer waste it on people who have not shown they know how to handle it. There comes a moment when pain stops being a force that destroys you and becomes a force that shapes you. It doesn't happen suddenly. It happens in small, almost invisible choices. The decision to stand back up when everything in you wants to collapse. The decision to learn instead of crumble. The decision to rebuild instead of retreat. This is the quiet transformation that occurs when you finally realize that breaking down has never once given you the life you deserve, but building yourself has the potential to create a life you've never imagined. For a long time, you might have believed that suffering made you stronger, that falling apart made you more human, that breaking down was somehow noble. But what you eventually learn is that pain itself doesn't make you stronger. Your response to it does. You learn that life will keep presenting the same heartbreaks, the same betrayals, the same disappointments, until you choose a different way of rising. You stop waiting for closure. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop waiting for someone else to fix what was shattered. Instead, you look inward and decide to repair yourself brick by brick. Building yourself does not mean denying your emotions. It means honoring them without letting them consume you. It means acknowledging your wounds without allowing them to define you. It means letting yourself feel without letting yourself fall apart permanently. You start developing emotional strength in the same way a body develops physical strength, through resistance, through persistence, through the decision to keep moving even when it hurts. And slowly, you become someone who no longer breaks the way you once did. You become someone who doesn't collapse under pressure, but grows from it. Instead of falling to pieces when someone leaves, you build deeper roots in yourself. Instead of spiraling when a relationship ends, you build new standards for the love you are willing to accept. Instead of crumbling when life becomes uncertain, you build inner foundations that cannot be shaken by external chaos. This shift is subtle but powerful. Others notice it before you do. They see the way you carry yourself differently, the way you respond instead of react, the way you hold your boundaries without trembling. They see that life no longer controls you through your weaknesses, because those weaknesses have become areas where you have poured patience, awareness, and growth. The version of you that once sought rescue has been replaced by a version that builds a life you don't need rescuing from. Building yourself also means redirecting your energy. You stop investing in things that drain you and start investing in things that strengthen you. You begin nurturing your passions, expanding your skills, elevating your mindset. You stop using pain as an excuse to stand still. You use it as fuel to move forward. You begin taking responsibility for the life you want, not the one you inherited or fell into. And with each step you take, the old you, the version that used to break down, becomes a distant memory. The world around you starts to change because your standards change. You no longer tolerate the behaviors you once excused. You no longer seek affection in places that offer inconsistency. You no longer allow disrespect to masquerade as misunderstanding. You build a life from self-worth, not from survival. You build relationships from mutual respect, not desperation. You build boundaries from clarity, not fear. And as you construct this new version of yourself, something remarkable happens. The people who once hurt you begin to see that their actions did not destroy you. They contributed to your transformation. The storms that were meant to break you became the pressure under which you forged a stronger identity. The losses that were meant to weaken you became the lessons that taught you how to stand taller. The pain that was meant to define you became the foundation upon which you rebuild. There is a specific kind of freedom that arrives the moment you stop allowing the opinions of others to sculpt the shape of your identity. It doesn't come from arrogance, rebellion, or indifference. It comes from finally understanding that most people judge from their wounds, not their wisdom. They speak from their fears, not their truth. They react to their own shadows, not your reality. And when you realize this, something inside you relaxes. The grip their opinions once had on your spirit loosens. You start breathing differently, walking differently, choosing differently. Becoming unbothered is not about pretending not to care. It is about caring more about what feels right for your soul than about what makes sense to someone who has never lived your life. You begin to see that every opinion is shaped by someone's perspective, and perspectives are limited by experience, biases, insecurities, and beliefs. You stop expecting clarity from people who haven't even figured out who they are. You stop expecting validation from those who cannot validate themselves. You stop expecting emotional accuracy from people who have never learned emotional honesty. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens through repeated moments of disappointment, moments when you realize you abandoned your own intuition to please someone who never understood you. It happens when you finally get tired of shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. It happens when you notice how heavy it feels to live under someone else's expectations, and how light it feels when you remove that weight. At first, becoming unbothered feels like disconnection, but it is actually reconnection. Reconnection to your own voice. That voice becomes louder than the noise around you. You start trusting what you feel over what others assume. You start choosing your path without waiting for approval. You stop apologizing for being who you are. And slowly, you realize that the opinions that once controlled you now sound distant, irrelevant, and strangely hollow. You begin observing people instead of absorbing them. You notice the difference between constructive insight and emotional projection. You recognize when someone's criticism is really just a reflection of their own unhealed wounds. And instead of carrying their judgment as truth, you let it pass through you like wind moving through an open window. When you become unbothered, your reactions shift. Insults don't sting with the same venom because you no longer attach your identity to them. Doubts from others don't destabilize you because your foundation is internal, not external. Disapproval doesn't intimidate you because you no longer fear being misunderstood. You accept that not everyone will like you, agree with you, or value you, and that none of those things have anything to do with your worth. People feel this change. They sense the steadiness in your energy. They notice that their words no longer sway you. They realize that the power they once had over your emotions has dissolved. And this is when regret begins to surface, because they see that you are no longer accessible to their influence. You will not bend to their opinions, adjust to their preferences, or play small to make them comfortable. Becoming unbothered also changes the way you carry your decisions. You no longer hesitate out of fear of judgment. You no longer choose the safer option just to avoid criticism. You no longer let someone else's limitations define the boundaries of your potential. Your choices come from a grounded place within you, a place that is aligned with who you truly are rather than who others want you to be. Most importantly, you gain a sense of internal quiet, a calm that is unshakable because it is rooted in self-acceptance. Their voices may continue, but they no longer reach the places within you where insecurity once lived. There is a profound shift that occurs when you stop cushioning the impact of someone else's behavior. For years, you may have protected people from the natural outcomes of their choices, explaining away their disrespect, absorbing the emotional damage, or smoothing over the rough edges of situations they created. You took responsibility for their moods, their mistakes, their inconsistency. You met them more than halfway, thinking compassion meant carrying what wasn't yours to carry. But there comes a moment when you realize that shielding people from consequences doesn't teach them accountability, it teaches them dependency. Allowing someone to feel the consequences of their actions is not punishment, it is clarity. It is the recognition that adults learn not through being rescued, but through being responsible for their own decisions. When someone hurts you, disrespects you, or takes advantage of your kindness, stepping back and letting reality meet them is not cruelty, it is honesty. It is the understanding that if you always soften the landing for someone, they will never understand the height they pushed you from. The moment you stop intervening, the dynamic changes. The excuses they relied on disappear. The emotional cushions you once provided vanish. The comfort of your forgiveness, your explanations, and your emotional stability is no longer readily available. They must now sit with the discomfort of their own choices without the benefit of your labor soothing the aftermath. This shift is often quiet. You don't announce it. You don't demand recognition. You don't declare war. You simply stop overfunctioning in relationships where others underfunctioned. You stop fixing what they broke. You stop interpreting their behavior for them. You stop carrying their remorse, guilt, or confusion. You leave them with the truth of what they created. And people feel this. They feel it when you stop responding immediately to emotional outbursts that once dictated your mood. They feel it when you stop giving second chances as a reflex. They feel it when you no longer participate in cycles that drained you. The absence of your emotional labor becomes unmistakable. The silence where explanations used to be becomes uncomfortable. The distance where reassurance once existed becomes undeniable. Allowing consequences also reveals something important about you. Your boundaries are no longer theoretical, they are lived, practiced, enforced. You no longer speak boundaries you never follow through on. Instead, you let your actions communicate your expectations. If someone consistently crosses your limits, you do not argue, you adjust your proximity. If someone shows you their priorities, you take them at face value. If someone treats you with disregard, you respond by removing access rather than offering justification. This process teaches others lessons you could never teach through words. When someone realizes your absence, is a direct result of their behavior, the truth becomes inescapable. When they feel the discomfort of your detachment, they begin confronting what you tolerated for far too long. When they see the stability of your life without their chaos, they are forced to acknowledge their own role in the dysfunction. At the same time, something powerful happens within you. You begin reclaiming the emotional energy you once spent managing others. You stop internalizing blame that never belonged to you. You understand that taking responsibility for someone's consequences is a form of self-abandonment. You begin choosing yourself not out of selfishness, but out of self-preservation. And with each step back, your self-respect grows. People who relied on your tolerance, your empathy, and your willingness to forgive suddenly stand face to face with themselves. Without your protection, they finally encounter the ripple effects of their behavior. Without your constant effort to maintain harmony, they experience the discord they created. Without your emotional buffering, the truth becomes impossible to avoid. And though you never wish them harm, you no longer protect them from the lessons they earned. There is a silent transformation that begins the moment you decide that your life will no longer be shaped by the wounds someone else left behind. At first, this transformation is barely visible, even to you. It begins as a shift in the way you think, the way you speak to yourself, the way you hold your boundaries. It begins the moment you stop asking why someone treated you the way they did and start asking what you deserve going forward. Slowly, without theatrics or noise, you rise. This rise is not linear or glamorous. It is built from days when you had to drag yourself through heaviness you didn't think you could overcome. It grows from the nights you sat alone, confronting truths you once ran from. It's shaped by every moment you choose healing over bitterness, self-respect over desperation, growth over stagnation. You begin evolving in ways no one expected, not even the people who once underestimated you. Those who hurt you rarely imagine you will rise. They expect you to stay wounded, attached, diminished. They expect you to remain intertwined with the version of yourself that tolerated their neglect, their inconsistency, their disregard. They assume their role in your life was bigger than your capacity to change. But they forget something essential. People grow in the shadows. People rebuild in silence. People evolve when no one is paying attention. And that's exactly what you do. You start strengthening the parts of yourself that once felt fragile. You build emotional resilience where there once was insecurity. You learn to trust yourself where you once trusted others too quickly. You cultivate independence where you once relied on external validation. This quiet rebuilding becomes the foundation of a new version of you, one shaped by intention rather than reaction. This rising is not about proving anything to anyone. It is not about revenge or competition. It is about reclaiming the power you once handed over consciously or unconsciously. It's about walking away from versions of yourself who lived in survival mode and stepping into a self who lives with awareness, choice, and dignity. You begin attracting different relationships, making different decisions, and setting different standards. Your life becomes less about pleasing and more about aligning. People who once underestimated you begin to notice the difference, not because you announce it, but because your energy shifts. Your boundaries become firmer. Your confidence becomes quieter but stronger. You stop engaging in the dynamics that once drained you. You stop explaining truths that should be obvious. You stop accepting the bare minimum because you finally understand your value. The version of you they once knew, the one who tolerated disrespect, ignored red flags, sacrificed too much, or held on too tightly, fades. In its place emerges someone who has tasted the strength that comes from loss, someone who has learned to advocate for their own needs, someone who no longer fears letting go. This new version doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't seek permission. You operate from self-trust now, not self-doubt. Your rise becomes a mirror for those who once hurt you. In your growth, they see the gap between who they assumed you were and who you have become. They realize they misjudged your resilience, underestimated your spirit, and overlooked your potential. Your evolution exposes the limitations of their perception. They begin to understand that they never broke you. They simply awakened the parts of you that were waiting to grow. As you rise, you stop participating in old patterns. You stop responding to old triggers. You stop allowing people to define your worth. You build a life that reflects your strength instead of your wounds. You embody a level of clarity, confidence, and self-awareness that surprises even you at times. The person who once cried over being misunderstood becomes the person who no longer seeks understanding from those who cannot offer it. There is a special kind of strength in remaining kind after everything you've endured. It is not weakness. It is not naivety. It is the quiet confidence of someone who has survived disappointment, betrayal, manipulation, and disrespect, and still chooses not to become hardened by it. But kindness no longer means access. Compassion no longer means availability. Warmth no longer means you will tolerate what once wounded you. You learn that you can be a good person without letting everyone close. Kindness becomes your nature, but closeness becomes a privilege. This shift comes from experience. Too many times your kindness was mistaken for weakness. Too many times people believed your empathy meant you were endlessly forgiving, endlessly patient, endlessly willing to give another chance. Too many times your softness was exploited by those who saw it as an opportunity rather than a blessing. Eventually, you learned the difference between being kind and being used. So you evolve. Your heart stays warm, but your gates become guarded. You still speak gently, but you no longer let everyone into the sacred spaces of your life. You listen with compassion, but you no longer absorb emotional burdens you did not create. You offer understanding, but only from a healthy distance. You no longer allow your kindness to be the bridge others walk across with muddy feet. This transformation is not dramatic, it's subtle. It shows in the way you no longer over-explain, over-apologize, or over-give. It shows in the way you choose where your energy goes with intention rather than impulse. It shows in the way you treat people with empathy while keeping your emotional world protected. You stop giving people the version of you they have not earned. Staying kind but unreachable means you no longer allow chaos to enter your life simply because you feel compassion. You can care about someone while declining their access to your peace. You can wish someone well without letting them return. You can forgive someone without inviting them back into the place they once caused harm. Your kindness remains intact, but the doors that once swung wide open now close softly, firmly, and without guilt. People notice this shift. They see that you're still warm, still understanding, still gentle, but different. Your emotional availability is no longer something they can assume. The free access they once enjoyed is gone. They cannot touch your peace the way they used to. They cannot manipulate your empathy. They cannot enter your inner world simply because they knock. You have become selective with your presence, thoughtful with your time, and careful with your heart. And this is where regret begins to surface in those who once took you for granted. They realize your kindness is still there, but it no longer belongs to them. They see your smile, your grace, your genuine spirit, but feel the distance in the places where closeness used to be. You are no longer someone they can reach with a simple apology, a familiar excuse, or a moment of nostalgia. The softness you offered freely now belongs only to those who reciprocate it. Staying kind but unreachable also means you no longer personalize the actions of others. When someone acts out of immaturity, insecurity, or selfishness, you recognize it as a reflection of them rather than a statement about you. This understanding gives you peace, not bitterness. You don't need to fight, defend, or prove anything. You simply choose distance where chaos exists. Your kindness becomes grounded, not draining. It becomes intentional, not exposed. It becomes a quiet offering, not an open invitation. You don't close your heart, you close the pathways to people who haven't earned a place in it. You stay kind, but unreachable, because you finally understand the difference between having a good heart and allowing others to take advantage of it.